Hey, what's happening? It's me, Robert Phoenix, and you know what day it is? It is Friday, and this is when we do the Friday FARcast. We stream live on YouTube, and it happens to be the first Friday of the month, which means that we'll be joined by the Crimis here shortly. They're actually right there. You can probably see their lovely graphic, which stands in for the video stream. And we're gonna get into the speech last night. We're also going to clean up some other unfinished business around Paolo Freiri and James Lindsay's last interpretation of his work, which moves into the realm of religion and the church, which I think at some point we'll be able to make a segue to whatever that thing was last night. Before we bring the Crimis on, what I want to do is I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor of the show. And for those of you who watch 15 Minutes of Flame, Monday through Thursday, that's 15 Minutes of Flame. You know who I'm talking about. And I do talk about our sponsor also on the Sunday night show. And that is True Hemp Science. And True Hemp Science is a business that's owned and operated by my good friend Christopher Lynch. And I've known Christopher since probably around 2014, 2015. And he's got some of the best CBD that I've run across. And ever since we decided to work together back in March, it's been an absolutely fantastic experience, tremendous results all the way around, from the product to the service that goes along with the product. And I can't speak highly enough about Chris's dedication to crafting some of the finest CBD for you and your pets. And I don't go a night without his patented sleep. Well, they're not patented, but they should be. They should be. If you go to truehempscience.com, because I'm going to turn this into a podcast, truehempscience.com/ref/23, and you get $100 of product or more, Krys will actually include free product for you, $100, $150 or more, and you get free shipping. So I didn't want to waste time with our friends, the Crimis. This is not a waste of time, but I just wanted to make sure I got this right up front here at the beginning of the broadcast. So True Hemp Science, our sponsor of the show. All right, let's do it. All the way from Asheville, North Carolina, we're going to bring our friends, the Crimis, on. And let's see. Here we go. We got their mic, and hopefully we get their video here.
Oh,
There they are.
hey.
Hello,
Magic.
Robert.
It's pure magic.
You got the red and the blue thing going on there.
Yeah, how about that?
Was that a conscious choice there?
No,
I don't want to be associated with that.
We don't check in with each other with what we're wearing
No.
beforehand. But I'll just hello everybody. Hey Robert, hope you're doing well. I was just going to add on to what you said about Krys, that he's got one product that I actually like. It's called Moon Dust.
The Moon Dust.
And that's for like focus, and for somebody like me who sometimes has trouble focusing on writing and things like that, I'm finding it useful. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
And the gummy bears.
And the gummy bears for coming down off of writing all day.
Right. The gummy bears, I think they're an essential item. Like they're
It appeals to the child in you.
They're a go-to. Yeah, you get that little kind of sweet little thing, even
Right.
though I don't think there's.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a little sugar in there? Maybe, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is. Yeah. So it's not.
Yeah,
I've been rushing the
Yes,
sugar
there
off
is.
lately because a little bit too
Yeah,
much.
it's a little sugary, but the gummy bears themselves are effective. I've had, I think, the liquid analog of the Moon Dust, so it's a good product.
Yeah, it mixes nice. It's a really interesting color. I
Yeah.
don't know where that blue actually comes from,
Oh,
since
maybe-
it's only
is it-
the product, but
Oh.
it must come out of the.
It's
the
not
thing.
like blue-green algae is added or something
No.
like that.
No, it's
That's
just.
I'll
it's
have to
just-
ask Krys. I'll ask him where he sources the Moon Dust. Not the CBD, but the color.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's really interesting about, speaking of blue, there was a time when the Republicans were blue.
Yes.
The conservatives
right.
were blue and the
Mhm.
Democrats were red. If you ever want to get a visceral picture of this, you can find the live broadcast of the 1980 presidential election with Reagan and Jimmy Carter. And Reagan wins. When Reagan wins the state, it's blue. Right? It is
So
blue.
not that, really, I thought it was further back, but
it's
really not that long ago.
Really.
And within our lifetime, certainly.
Within our lifetime. So somewhere along the way, they decided to flip this thing.
Mm.
And now we're going to get to it. What happened last night, right, is the Biden side reclaimed the red. That's what they did.
It just looked like satanic to me.
Right.
Well, that's part of it, but they're reclaiming the red.
You think?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and we can get into that because there's more than a few interesting things about that.
Yeah. So I think we'll do the second hour crawling through that swamp water that we saw last night. In fact, I didn't really see. I don't like watching those things live.
No.
Because I feel like I'm there with all these other eyeballs and all these other circuits, and I'm adding to that moment, right? And so whatever my filter or intention is, they're siphoning it off, and I don't want that.
Right. Because go ahead.
So I usually watch it after the fact.
Right. If we even watch it at all. But yes, because there certainly wasn't anybody there watching it.
No, we were counting like how many people looked like they were in the crowd. It was like maybe 60.
Yeah. Maybe it's hard. It's the whole, we'll get into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good enough.
But ordinarily, I can't even listen to him speak because the frequency of his voice just sets my teeth on edge.
He was really hyped up last night.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what they had him on,
mm-hmm.
but he was hyped up because he usually can't go 30 minutes straight without making some kind of a glitch or a gaffe. And with the exception of the odd cough that he seems to have persistently, he motored through that 25-minute stretch.
Yeah, he was zipped up.
So whatever they gave him, he was flying. The other thing I noticed about him, I actually got an image. I pulled an image, and it looks like his ears are different. Like the ears on this Biden are closer to the other ears. Like the lobes are not attached. So I have a standalone picture. We'll blow it up and we'll take a look at it because for the longest time those lobes were connected to the head, and now it seems like they're not. So we'll go.
Well, that could be an answer to why he was able to do it.
Maybe. I think we're dealing with multiples. I mean, every president has multiples, but that's been going on for a while.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll get into the Biden mess. Let's talk about what we were talking about the last time you were on the show, which was a pretty deep dive into, there it is, the politics of education, Paolo Freiri, and the pedagogy of the oppressed, and James Lindsay's final chapter of the deep dive into Frieri and Henry Giroux and a number of the other people that are and have been very instrumental in moving this ideology forward through the three main pillars of our society, which James Lindsay talks about: government, education, and the third being religion. We're going to touch upon the religious part of it today and some very interesting developments that Lindsay uncovered. So why don't we jump in here, and I'm just going to throw up a visual, and I may refer, because I just pulled this up, I may refer to part of this recording at some point, but let's just throw up the visual here. This is where we've been drawing a lot of our insight from. James Lindsay's excellent
Mhm.
series on YouTube called New Discourses. And he's been just incredible at going into these crawl spaces around this material and pulling it together. I don't think there's anybody on the planet that can do what he's doing.
No, and
No.
it just rolls out of him like he owns the information.
Yeah, and he's got, now we're talking, he's probably got like 100 hours.
Oh my God.
Of
Yeah.
videos, on this. He's made himself impossible to keep up with, really,
Yep.
at this point.
But it's a great resource for anyone who wants to understand what's happening. I was looking at the overlay on the picture the other day on
Mhm.
Paolo's face and trying to figure out what it is. So it looked like at the just under his chin, that crossbar, there's a cross, like some kind of a cross in there.
And also on his forehead.
Yeah, almost like a Celtic cross or something. And it couldn't make any sense of it. I was trying to figure out what the heck is that?
The bottom image almost looks like something for video. Like there's a filter on
Oh,
Zoom where
I see.
it's almost like a test pattern kind of video.
right. Okay.
So a test pattern filter. I think that's what that is.
Because it's hard to see because it's a little bit smaller than it would be ordinarily, but that one marker, the bottom crossbar, the image just underneath it. Yeah.
Diamond.
Yeah.
It looked to me like some kind of a cross, but it could be a marker.
I think that's a video test pattern filter, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Up here, though, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, I'm thinking, we used to have those sort of, A-frame churches.
Right.
That was the kind of the modern church. After they got rid of, the stone and the marble, they started making these wooden A-frame churches.
Right.
Right.
The 60s.
Yeah.
After
So,
Vatican II.
all right. So for people who are new to this whole topic, Paolo Freiri was a Brazilian and kind of grew up, what would you say, like a middle-class family in Brazil?
Yes, he was he was educated into the oppressors.
Right. So he spent a lot of time looking
Oppressors?
around the disproportionate number of people that suffered from poverty, the inability to read, right? There was not a lot of literacy.
Mhm.
So he saw this as a significant gap between the haves and the have-nots. And as he went through his educational training, which was partially religious, right? I mean, you can see this.
He was Catholic, right?
He was Catholic,
Mhm.
and he makes references in his work, which Lindsay talks about, to the new Easter that people have to experience, which we'll get into.
Right, and he had a connection with the Red Bishop, Camara. So he knew Camara. So he knew him, who was maybe the foremost proponent of Marxism within the Catholic Church.
And they called him the Red Bishop because he was communist. So
Yeah.
that's where the appellation of red comes in.
Right. So I don't think we ever really made the connection explicitly. Maybe we kind of talked about it the last time that you were on the show, but also the connection between Frieri and liberation theology.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
And liberation theology as an arm of the Catholic Church, which is weaponized as something to be employed as part of the class struggle.
Right.
So Frieri comes from that world. So he comes from a world where he's indoctrinated into Catholicism and the machinations of Catholicism. But then he gets his leftist Marxist training along the way, and he literally becomes a fusion of these two worlds. This is what happens.
Yeah.
Right.
And let's expand it out and look at what's going on in the rest of the world and the church at that time. This is he comes to America in the 80s, but in the 60s, remember we did that whole story on Windswept House, the book that Father Malachi Martin wrote.
Right.
That talks about the Vatican and the infiltration of the Marxists into the Catholic Church. And their end game was to dethrone the Pope and spread out all of that power amongst the bishops. And then it becomes, then they come and it's
the People's Church.
Then it's the People's Church, not the Church of Christ. So
Right.
you brought it out of the realms of the divine and brought it into the mundane and demoted it. And so all of that is swirling around when this man is also doing his work in South America.
So the last time you were here, what we got into was Freiri's ideas that were transposed into the educational system. And just to quickly go over those things or recount those things, some of the main pieces have to do with literacy. And that literacy based on the Freirean system is not the same literacy that we grew up with, right? We grew up with things like phonics, learning how to do things on our own, you know, that there was for lack of a better term, a meritocracy. There, you know, if you did well, there were hierarchies, you were rewarded for, you know, your intelligence or whatever standards we had at a certain point in time. In the Freire world, all of those things are wiped out and frowned upon because they don't want individuals. What they want is they want people to identify with the oppressed. So when they do something like inside the school system, like teach somebody to read, when we talked about this before, instead of spelling out the word bus, right, they would have a picture of Rosa Parks on a bus.
Right.
Right.
It has to be in service to their theology, their Marxist theology.
Whatever you're learning has to have a context to the church of the oppressed. That's what
secondary.
That's right.
It's secondary.
That's right. So that when you begin to think and you have these reference points in your mind, when somebody says bus or when you see a bus, what happens? You have this picture of this woman in the back of the bus. And there are all these different anchors for how people learn, basically. I mean, through reading, through word association, through imagery, and through historical context, because that's going to play a pretty big role here when we talk about.
Sure. When I was a kid, we had Dick and Jane, See Jane Run, you know, and it was two children playing.
Right.
And this is very different.
So this is and now, again, just to get people up to speed, who didn't see the last episode, which I'll leave a link to, by the way, in the show notes.
Good,
So you could go back and watch this.
Helpful.
The other thing is the rebranding of the hierarchy inside of the classroom. So a student is no longer a student.
Right.
They are a learner. And that a teacher is no longer a teacher, but they're an educator. And in the Freirean model, everything is horizontal.
Right.
So the student and the learner and the educator are on the same level, right?
Now, just to throw this in for a second, because last Friday you talked with Russ Winter about the Milgram experiment.
Yeah.
Notice that the person supposedly receiving the shocks was called a learner.
Yes.
Did you pick up on that?
I did pick up on that.
Marxist language in that. Interesting.
And you know what's interesting is I actually thought that Russ had written that. I'm like, well, Russ is hip on the language, right? But then I went back in and there it was. I mean, it was in the context of what Milgram was talking about, the learner.
Right.
It was already there.
Right. And so that really does map on to this another aspect, because it's around the same time. That's, I don't know what it was at, early 60s, whatever. And one of the things that you didn't mention was that they found a box of tapes in the basement that proved that the whole thing was fake. They found a box of tapes of them coaching, you know, the people that supposedly pushed the buttons. But, be that as it may, we can see that language in the university system in, was that Stanford, I guess? I can't remember now. That language was already infiltrated in there, as far as all that goes. And it was the language guiding that experiment. And again, that experiment is to cast this sort of a dark aspersion onto humanity and what a human is,
Right.
So I think it's connected in there. That's all I want.
I think it is too. I think it is too. So when we connect those dots, we're looking at something that's deep and baked in and has been being rolled out for a very long time, which I've looked at before. You go back and look at the 100-Year March,
right,
which literally starts in 1920 and it goes up to 2020. And it's like, wow, 100-Year March. Everything in 1920 is nuts when it comes to the formation of communism and the worldwide parties.
47.
Yeah. So
Pivotal.
This stuff is baked in. It's totally baked in.
It is.
And they've been working on it for a very long time.
Another thing I'd like to just bring up again in regard to the relationship of the student and the teacher is that whole, he called it education for the Easter thing. Anyway, resurrection. Anyway, he's got this whole thing where you have to die to be reborn. So
Right.
the teacher has to die from who he is as a teacher, his role,
Right.
and be reborn as an equal to the student. And the student likewise has to die as a submissive to the teacher and be reborn as the teacher's equal.
Right.
Which now you've got all this happy horse shit about, everybody's equal. The student is equal to the teacher. You can't tell me anything. But it's their whole Easter resurrection overlay that he brought in that really is a religion into the school.
I think that you bring up a really important point around the religious component that comes out of the Freirean inversion of Catholicism and
Exactly what it is.
the resurrection, right? The crucifixion and the resurrection.
And they're blatant about it. It's right up front. They call it the Easter resurrection, whatever.
They are blatant about it. And we're seeing it now where we have these teachers who, we talked about this last time, who talk about openly, they talk about their gender, they talk about their partners. It's like, and that
With the
is
students, right.
right. And that is not something that is some kind of personal liberation trip, right? That is baked into the model.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Like they are instructed to do that.
Right, because one of the things that Freire brings up over and over again is he criticizes the previous education system and the church, because the church for him is another education system, as claiming to be neutral. Now, I don't. Again, this is I'll tell you what they think, and then I'll criticize it because I don't quite recall the Catholic Church ever considering itself neutral in any way whatsoever,
Right.
or the education system. So, but the reason that he continuously criticizes is because he says, well, you can't be neutral, and that gives them the green light to, to project Marxism on every subject. Well, it's not neutral because we're always teaching Marxism. Doesn't matter what subject it is, we're teaching Marxism. We're
Right.
teaching liberation theology. It doesn't matter what the subject is. So they'll accuse the Catholic Church of claiming to be separate and not doing that. But meanwhile, or the current word now is grooming, of course. And apparently James Lindsay got into trouble for using that word.
He got kicked off of Twitter.
Right.
Oh,
lifetime ban on Twitter.
For using
lifetime.
Right. And it is all grooming. And and there is a point to, we got groomed in certain ways in our education too.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely. So one of the other things, and I think this dovetails with education and religion and the youth, is that in the Freirean model, they do not believe in innocence.
Hmm.
right? They want to eradicate this idea of
That's-
innocence very quickly
Mm-hmm.
because in that world, innocence is connected to naivete and privilege, right? It's like, no, you have to
Right.
bring these young beings as quickly into the world of the oppressed as possible so that they don't have any kind of cultural bias. And we have to work harder at breaking them down later in life. So
They're doing a good job.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So they have a specific strategy to eradicate innocence as quickly as possible. We're
Right,
seeing
and
it. We're seeing
It's
it now.
diabolical.
And-
Yeah,
and
it's
Freire-
astonishing.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Freire calls it
Go.
naivete and
I wrote it down somewhere.
the two the two possibilities of naivete and starts with an S. Oh, frig.
Well, maybe
I have it in a note somewhere.
Maybe I can find it.
But the point being that you either are naive and
Or
you don't know what's going on. You know, you don't, naivete is that you're naive of the Marxist reality, right?
Right.
You're naive of everything falls under the oppressor-oppressed model.
That's
All
right.
right. Then there's a second one where it's like word like scheming or something like that. Right. It starts with an S. And that's where you understand the Marxist reality, oppressor oppressed, but you side with the oppressors because it's more lucrative or whatever. Right. But this is typical of Marxism and Frieri, but there is no other way out. You know, Marxism is the only ideology. It's the only reality, you know, and this will lead us back when we get into Gnosticism. You know, Marxism is the only reality. So there's only two choices. It's either you're a full-blown Marxist, three actually. You're a full-blown Marxist. You're naive of Marxism, or you're siding with the oppressors.
Right.
You know, so in other words, it's a closed system.
Right.
And there is no critique of it. It can only critique you.
Right.
So that's
Right.
another thing that's baked into the cake. I'm sorry, I don't remember though, but it means it's
We've
either
got like
naive.
10 pages of notes. We spent the whole week.
We have
going through this.
too many notes to find anything.
Right.
You need a teleprompter. That's what you need. One of those.
That's
Oh.
right. That's
One of
right.
those
I need
invisible. One of those clear teleprompters that
That'd be nice.
is so works so well for Biden.
It does. I
Um,
noticed.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an important part. That there is no alternative.
Shrewd is the word. There we
Got
go.
it
At the same time.
You guys
Shrewd.
nailed it at the same time.
Shrewd
Shrewd.
versus naive. So that was a big thing about Frieri's
Okay.
critique.
Bravo. We
Shrewd.
redeemed ourselves.
So either
So-
you're shrewd and you know what's
You're
going on.
shrewd, so like you're pretending to go along with Marxism, but you're really being shrewd to protect yourself from their
Right.
onslaughts. So you're hiding it. You're being shrewd.
Right.
You're not
Right.
really on board with the program. You're just telling us what we want to hear so that we don't torture you anymore.
Which is kind of like the institutional government right now, and that's their way of approaching.
Well, I was just gonna say. I mean, I feel like that shrewdness is part of the program. Like they're being shrewd. They're
Well,
not.
they are.
Yeah, they are.
But
They're not.
well, it's what he calls the iron law of will projection. James Lindsay calls it.
Right.
It's an iron law that they will project onto you what they're doing,
Right.
right? So he
Yeah.
uses that phrase quite frequently. And he'll point out, see that's their iron law of will projection.
Which is, I think, what we saw last night.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, writ
in
large.
Yeah. We.
all four suits, not just spades.
Writ
Yeah.
large.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into. I think we've covered the educational part. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah.
But I think that those are the touch points that we,
Right.
the formation of learning and everything that you learn has to do within the context of the oppressor and the oppressed.
It's in service to
Right.
the
It's in
dogma.
service, exactly. And everything you learn has to be in service of the dogma, which I think is a great
Right.
phrase.
And in religious terms, that split into oppressor oppressed is the fall from Eden.
Right. So why don't we get into this whole thing with the religious component, the third leg to Frieri's infiltration.
Right.
And this is a really big one.
Right. So you probably look, so he spent time at the World Council of Churches.
He was that's right. He was invited to join them.
Yes,
Right, with,
and it was a big deal.
With the Red Bishop. Kamara was also there. Kamara. I want to hook it in with Kamala.
I was thinking,
which actually this is as an aside, the friends of ours who married us, who were both Lutheran ministers from Germany, that we flew over. I actually met them when they were at the World Council of Churches in Geneva.
Right.
And, went over there. I don't know, did I say that last week? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
But anyway, so I got the most memorable thing I remembered, besides the fact that it was, Swiss and beautiful, the place, the campus, was that they had a life-size chess set.
Yeah, I think we talked about that.
Yeah.
Huh.
But anyway,
Okay.
so I just saying that I was there briefly, and that would have been 1983.
And we were also, when we visited them with Thomas and Christina in Germany, they took us to see the Enlightenment Gardens.
Right.
Remember?
Right. The Enlightenment Garden. And the Enlightenment plays into a lot of this when we get into
With
the
logic and reason.
Gnosticism and all that. So anyway, so he was at the, so again, this is this governing body as a not governing, but the World Council of Churches, which, seems to be something that's looking towards moving towards a one world religion of some kind, and on the surface, there are people there just going there, dialogue between different faiths, etc. But I think there's an overall mission. And then, of course, the important thing was Freiri's mentor, Kamara, being invited by Klaus Schwab to give a speech at the World Economic Forum.
Very early on.
That Schwab says it was, this big risk he took.
Because they had a policy not to invite communists in.
Into yes,
right,
or even into.
And he was an avowed
Switzerland.
communist. Dom Kamara was an avowed communist, and the Red Bishop, so they called him that because he was a communist. So, according to Klaus Schwab, he really stuck his neck out to bring this man in and to give some kind of a talk. Believe it.
So that was the import of the Marxist virus into the World Economic Forum.
Right. Well, then the World Economic Forum invites another person, which is going to be an important figure as we kind of climb down this rabbit hole here, and that's Rick Warren.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And I don't know a lot about Rick Warren, so go.
Rick Warren wrote a book called A Purpose-Driven or Purpose-Filled Life. I forget which one it is. And he is one of these modern evangelicals. And Warren essentially went to Klaus Schwab and said, if you don't get into the churches, you are going to fail.
Mhm.
This is right in James Lindsay's recording.
Mhm.
And he references Warren at least a couple times in that,
Yes, he does.
amongst other modern evangelicals.
Mhm.
So then essentially what happened, and I don't know when he actually went to Davos to talk to Klaus Schwab, but once that happened, they decided they were going to deploy these ideas into the Western evangelical tradition. So the ideals of the World Economic Forum and Frieri, who I think is very close to the WEF, not completely, but very, very close. So this guy essentially is a Judas.
Yes.
He's a Judas because he is taking these ideas, these Freirean ideas, the ideas of the World Economic Forum, and Lindsay makes a very clear distinction between an individual who has a relationship with God, right? God the Father, salvation through Christ, right? And the Freirean model, and we're gonna go into the weeds with this. The Freirean model is based on a form of Gnosticism, which has a very different relationship to this kind of I thou, right? I thou relationship.
Right.
So Warren is basically a he's a faith traitor, Traitor. And what's interesting about Warren, when you go into his bio on YouTube, I'm sorry, on Wikipedia, the very last one of the very last lines here is one of the controversies, which was, so I can find it. During the 2008 United States presidential election, Warren hosted the civil forum on the presidency at his church with both presidential candidates, John McCain and Barack Obama. Obama later sparked controversy when he asked Warren to give the invocation at the presidential inauguration in January 2009. So that should give you an idea as to what Rick Warren is about. Rick Warren.
What was the controversy? Why is it controversial?
Because Rick Warren, at a certain point during his time in California, was anti-Prop 8. And Prop 8 was the initiative to ban gay marriages. So he had a track record of being a conservative, right? So that was part of the controversy. So here we go.
All right.
It's not really there, but it's more in the California part. So he had been given this label as being somebody who was intolerant, right? And I don't know if that was really a part of his makeup, if he had to assuage his ministry. And a lot of people in California, because I was there when that proposition went to the ballot, a lot of people were not for the institutionalization of gay marriage. They weren't. In fact, it lost. They had a vote and it lost, and it got overturned by a judge.
Oh, really?
Yep.
How would
And
you
they
do
made
that?
a big.
She said innocently.
They made a big deal out of the fact that he was a libertarian judge, but they left out the fact that he was also, well, he happened to be a gay libertarian judge. So, I mean, come on, you know, and if you weren't demoralized enough, right? If you weren't demoralized enough, and you have a vote, and theoretically the vote speaks for the people, and then you have one radicalized judge who has a vested interest in the outcome, just flip to this. What's
And
it
aren't we
matter?
accustomed to this
And
now?
we're seeing more and more how important that the appointment of judges is.
And secretaries of state.
And one of the things that they used to justify that was that, well, all this out-of-state money came into California to, you know, run the campaign and help defeat the initiative. Oh, the Mormons were involved. There's a lot of Mormon money that came. I mean, so what, right? Out-of-state money happens in every election, and it doesn't matter what it is, right? You're gonna get people of a vested interest, some more than others.
We have someone running for a pretty much avowed communist running for our congressional seat that'll be vacated by
Madison?
by Madison Cawthorn.
Really?
She's running, you know, she's running against someone else now, and her name is Yasmin Beach Ferrara, and she got something like $20 million from Soros.
20 million?
She got a huge amount for a congressional run. I may be wrong on the number.
20 million is a lot of money, man.
It
She
was
must be
sev- it
really
was-
important.
It was in the millions, yes. I mean, this is getting a communist right in the middle of, Western North Carolina.
Is that what
she
it
was
takes?
on
Is
the
that,
city
is that how
council.
much it takes? Does it take $20 million to make that vote happen? Is that
Well, yeah, to overwhelm, and Asheville's going to vote.
well, you
for
got
her
to pay people off too. That's
Yeah,
payoff money.
and
That's
she's
big
gonna
payoff
win.
money.
Yeah, and she's going to win because she already wrecked the city council, then she wrecked the county and made the county. Everyone else was unmasked, but yet the county that we're in, Buncombe County, stayed masked up, and she was one of the people behind that. And so she's they took down the obelisk in Asheville and all that crap. And
Was
so-
she one of the people that was on the city council? And I think I send you like a picture or something, the JPEG, and I went through each and every one of them. Do you remember that?
She was. It wasn't that long ago, so it may have been.
Yeah, I think I was being very
Anyway, she's someone they have plans for.
clearly. So Rick Warren is the guy that's instrumental in bringing the Freirean vision to the World Economic Forum.
Mhm.
And then the World Economic Forum then understands the importance of recruiting more Rick Warrens.
And
so
that's
that
the
they
third
can-
leg of the
so that
stool.
they can have the third leg, which means that they're going to have all three of the legs: government, education, and religion. And when that's complete, then the doctrine of the oppressed is the new religion, essentially.
Right.
The new religion, the new education, and the new government all in one.
Well, it is remarkable when you see that they actually just took the whole framework of the Catholic Church and, flipped it over and made it into Marxist religion. They took all these tenets from the Catholic Church and then just made it Marxist.
Right.
It's a religion,
Right. And
Right.
especially with the Easter resurrection principle.
the Easter resurrection thing, which is critical to this whole Freirean belief, right? But when it comes to religion, it's just a notch and groove. It just fits right into that.
Mhm.
What was I going to say? There was something about the religious piece.
Okay.
Why don't we do this? Why
All
don't I just fire up a little Lindsay here?
Oh, good.
Why don't I just do that? I don't even know where I'm going to land this thing, but why don't we just, do a little, it's like a little John Cagey kind of thing, right? Little chance composition.
Right. You can
Okay.
leave, and be really John Cage and leave the volume off.
You know what? I've done that before, but not intentionally.
Not on the purpose.
Not on the purpose. No. All right. Let me bring him back up here. Let's bring Lindsay back up. And I'm just going to, all right, I'm going to move the slider and you tell me when to stop the slider.
Which one are you on? Which
Just
podcast? It's
doesn't
most
matter. You
recent?
just got to tell me.
Oh, I don't see it. So
When I see
You don't need to. You just got to
Oh,
tell me.
Oh,
go.
stop.
All right. I heard stop. It's at 129.29.
Which talk is it?
It's the one, Frieri and the Marxist transformation of the church.
Okay.
All right. So this is Chris's chance composition selection of James Lindsay. And
My,
Frieri.
Random.
What do you call it?
All right, here we go. Let's see what we get.
121.
That's what he's going at. That's what his liberation theology is about. This is a blatant heresy against Christianity, where the relationship is each individual with God, according to the terms that God has set, and the free will of human, if you're not a Calvinist, has decided that you can choose or not choose. That's the theology. That's the deal. This is something different. You must subsume yourself to the class, which will be the mediator of salvation. In other words, the classes or the state, depending on which way you want to frame it, is the thing that will self-sacrifice to end human self-estrangement and thus create liberation and emancipation. or salvation, if you will. So this rounds out his big point about what a theology of liberation is about then. That's this section. It means siding with the oppressed and adopting a revolutionary commitment so that you become class-oriented with an understanding that the class in the end is going to destroy and denounce itself, a self-sacrificial you, but not you specifically. You as in the you that's part of the we is going to be the Christ that's going to have to die and be resurrected. And you do that by personally dying and being resurrected on the side of the oppressed, which is to say, thinking of yourself in terms of that class thinking. Does that make sense? You die as an individual, you're reborn as part of a class with class consciousness. And then that in the end, that because the dialectic will progress, it spirals up, it spirals down, that class will sacrifice itself, and then we'll have true liberation. So the individual sacrifices itself to the class, and then the class sacrifices itself to liberation. That's how it's laid out. That's a theology of liberation. That's a heresy. Woke can't come into your church, guys. And if you're a pastor, everybody who starts thinking this way has adopted a evil heresy and is going to hell. So you might want to work on making sure that doesn't happen and saving these people who've not just lost, they've been stolen, they're deceived, with a D, with a capital D, I should say. So in light of the fact that Freire was probably just writing this during or after his appointment in the World Council of Churches, let's take one further look at this section for amusement's sake to kind of understand what we're dealing with. He says, existence is not despair but risk. If I don't exist dangerously, I cannot be. But if my existence is historical, the existential risk is not a simple abstract category. It is also historical. That means that to exist is first and foremost to risk oneself, though the form and effectiveness of risk will vary from person to person and from place to place. And here's why it's funny to read this, because remember, he's doing this to the World Council of Churches. I do not assume risk in Brazil as the Swiss assumes it in Geneva. Even if we are both of one political mind, our socio-historical reality will condition the form our risk will take. To seek to universalize the form and content of existential risk is an idealistic illusion unacceptable to anyone who thinks dialectically. And so now he's talked about the theology, and now he's going to talk about the role of the churches, which is going to be super communist. So, Freire finishes that section with his clear view into the demands of the Marxist dialectical faith. He says dialectical thinking constitutes one of the major challenges to those who follow the option we're talking about here. It is not always easy, even for those who identify with the people, to overcome a petite bourgeois education that is individualistic and intellectual, dichotomizing theory and practice, the transcendent and the mundane, intellectual work and manual work. This trademark shows up constantly in attitudes and behavior patterns in which the dominated classes become mere objects of their impatient revolutionism. That's what he says. So what he's saying is that you've been probably brought up in a petite bourgeois education system that is individualistic and intellectual. And what does that do? Well, it dichotomizes theory and practice. So the theoretical idea and practical idea that Hegel said constitute the two forms of the now self-estranged absolute, the deity that forgot it's a deity until they're brought back together. Theory and practice have to be brought back together, and that's praxis, which is reflective and adapts itself through continual revolution in Marx. But it also has a dichotomy, a separation of the transcendent and the mundane. So here we see the Hermetic alchemy entirely. So the idea is that we live here in the mundane world, and maybe the spiritual influences have something to do with what happens here on the earth, but the spiritual realm is kind of completely separate. The transcendent realm, where heaven, where God is not of this world. That's what Jesus said. My kingdom is not of this world. That's what he tells Pilate, right, in the gospel before they kill him. My kingdom is not of this world, the transcendent and the mundane. But in the Hermetic religion, the transcendent or the divine is contained within the mundane, and the goal is to use some kind of an alchemical process or criticism, if it's this social theory, to break open the mundane world and free the divine so that it can gather or recollect back together and recollect or remember what it is, which is divine. It's going to separate intellectual work and manual work. Okay, so this is what he's saying. And he picks up by outlining the role of the church in a way that's very similar to what the World Economic Forum said in 2015 and 16 when it anticipated winning everything. It said, quote, in trying now to analyze more deeply the role of the church, especially its educational role, remember he thinks of it as a big school, we must return to some of the points made above, first of all to the fact that it cannot be politically neutral. So what he's saying is that the church is inherently political, just like education, so there's only a church between being evil or being Marxist. This is your typical Manichaean Gnosticism that's kind of inside of this witch's brew of Gnosticism and Hermeticism that Hegel and Marx and Rousseau and these characters kind of formulated in the relevant century, 1760 to 1860 or thereabouts in Europe. He says it cannot avoid making a choice. It can't be neutral, so it cannot avoid making a choice. It is the church, and therefore we in turn cannot discuss the church's role abstractly or metaphysically. So in other words, the only way to understand the church is, quote, concretely. That's a Marxist term or a Hegelian term. So the only way you can understand the church is through a Marxist analysis of power and its effects. This is where when we do a critique of something, we no longer think of it on the regular terms. We import the structural, power-based, concrete analysis of Marxism. So the church, in fact, cannot even be understood theologically, according to Freire. Theology itself, it's abstract and metaphysical. So here's where we see, for example, the Southern Baptist Convention, the Presbyterian Church of America, and so on. Here's where we see their push to reinterpret Scripture and the Gospel Coalition, for example, has been doing this for a while, and theology itself through a pedagogy of the oppressed. This is why we see Tim Keller, for example, writing the foreword to a book about the critical theory of the Bible that's just recently come out. Its choice, the church's choice, remember, it has to make a choice because it can't be neutral. This is Freire again. Its choice will condition its whole approach to education, its concepts, objectives, methods, processes, and all of its auxiliary effects. And so now we're going to talk about the seminaries. It is, he says, this conditioning affects the theological training of the leadership of the militant church as well as the education dispensed by the church. Even theological education and reflection are touched. And that's why your seminaries have to use the pedagogy of the oppressed to reinterpret Scripture, the gospel, and theology so that they're in line with the so-called concrete Marxist analysis, or the Marxist analysis of so-called concrete conditions that people must be conscientized or brainwashed to see. See, the values have to be transvaluated, just like Marcuse said, so that they will be so that you will die to your elitism and individualism and be reborn on the side of the oppressed through the personal experience of Easter. So you have to be brainwashed. And it'll be done generatively, of course. So while you have certain people, many of whose names I've mentioned, and I'll come back to them, I'm sure, who are bringing this into the church, into the seminaries for this reason, because even theological education and reflection are touched. What are they going to do? How do they make the move? Well, the goal is to bring a little bit of Marxist oppression perspective in, because once you get the oppression perspective started, it will basically spiral out of control and take over everything. And the method that Freire uses is the generative themes method. You tool your lesson in terms of a generative theme that will generate emotional responses by picking at people's so-called concrete structural conditions, by finding the things that make them miserable, that they think are unfair, that there's a point of grievance and a scab to pick, and then picking it and using different things from the relevant educational material to do that. If it's reading, for example, maybe you're going to have them read about, I don't know, the mistreatment of Native Americans or something. Or you're going to have them read Howard Zinn's take on Christopher Columbus. Or if it's, that would be more of history, I guess. If it was in mathematics, you're going to have them analyze statistics to do with race and poverty or something like this to generate the conversation. Maybe you're going to, as the Drag Queen Story Hour paper indicates, Drag Pedagogy is the title of that paper, you can look it up, that you're going to bring a drag queen in to generate questions about why men might dress as women and whether we have to dress as certain ways or whatever, or why we can't gender bend or gender queer, or in the parlance, this is a real term, go type it into your search engine and find out, gender fucking, they call it, because you're fucking with gender. That's their words, not mine. These are all generative things. They're there to raise the question, to start the dialogue, and to force the dialogue to take place on critical consciousness terms, to conscientize. Freire doesn't stutter throughout this book. We've read the whole book. I'm not going to do it again. So what does it look like in church? Well, maybe they'll say that David raped Bathsheba. Maybe they'll say Jesus died to emancipate people from racism specifically. Maybe they'll say Jesus was a dialectical figure of history, a transformative figure. Maybe they won't say those things, but we know that they have said those things. And they'll say maybe those things aren't true, but we need to have the conversation. And as a matter of fact, we don't need to just have the conversation. We need to have that conversation. So not because it might be true or false. Remember, Michel Foucault said that whether things are true or false doesn't matter. Freire said that the lessons are in fact not knowledge, but a mediator to political knowledge. Okay, so the point isn't to have the conversation about whether David raped Bathsheba so that you can conclude exegetically or whatever that that's the way that that event should be understood. What you need to do is you need to come to learn to understand it from the perspective of people who might read it that way. People who might feel that way when they read it. You need to understand their feelings. You need to understand why somebody might see it that way. You need to understand it from the perspective of the oppressed, from the standpoint of the oppressed, from the standpoint of the people. If it moves your heart and you convert to their heresy, that's great. There's an Easter waiting for you. It must be existentially experienced. Then you'll know that the church has a fake Easter. You can die.
Why don't we stop there?
Rick Warren.
It's a lot.
Let me name him again.
Oh.
Rick Warren. You know, The Purpose-Driven Life, Rick Warren. That Rick Warren. Pastor Rick Warren, who wrote The Purpose-Driven Life. That guy, not some other guy with the same name. That guy went to many Davos meetings and sold out the churches to them for this three-legged stool, public-private faith message. And here's what a white paper that in 2016, when the World Economic Forum was pretty certain for various reasons, namely Hillary Clinton and other political people who actually did win, that they expected to win, were, facing election. They thought they were going to win everything and they were going to be able to move their plan forward. So they put out a lot of white papers that are very telling in 2016. And another episode we've talked about, and I will go over soon in yet another episode of the podcast, one about social and emotional learning. But in 2016, they put out a long white paper about the role of faith. And that's where Klaus Schwab is directly quoted there, saying, as a matter of fact, directly quoted saying that values cannot be justified by the intellectual process alone. Faith must be involved. That's what he said. So here's what this white paper says in its introduction. The World Economic Forum recognizes that faith plays a dynamic and evolving role in our society. Demographic trends suggest the number of faith adherents will increase over the next 2 decades while the secular population will decrease. People of faith, therefore, have profound impacts on community mobilizing. Sounds like something Barack Obama would do, for both productive and damaging purposes. The power of faith to impact global issues and shape global perspectives is a fundamental reason why the Forum consistently engages faith leaders and perspectives in our work. As a part of our efforts to incorporate an understanding of the impact of faith in our analysis of complex global trends and challenges, the Forum established the Global Agenda Council on the Role of Faith. Council members comprise the world's foremost experts to provide thought leadership that furthers the faith agenda within Forum's activities.
Okay. So essentially, what James Lindsay laid out are a lot of the things that we talked about with a few more details. And then we got the backstory with Rick Warren.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like, although I don't have the roster in front of me, they have the young global leaders who some of whom aren't very young, but I'm assuming they have a version of that for churches too, right?
Or they're in the same, because it's huge, the list.
Maybe. I've gone through that list, and a lot of the people that I've, not the entirety of, but I went through a lot of it, and a lot of them are either from government, finance, technology, or some kind of an NGO or foundation. And maybe they're in there somewhere that I just missed them.
Or maybe the World Council of Churches has that list.
Or yeah. So clearly you can see that there is a massive infiltration and push to standardize these ideas across the board.
Which started in 1985 with Freire and Garreau bringing those professors into the university system and making sure that they got tenured.
Right.
So there were I first heard 100, and then later I was listening to James Lindsay, and he was saying hundreds, plural, so I don't know, would make sense. But if you wonder, how did the education system get so sullied? That was a real marker, 1985.
Right.
Yeah.
And then after they got into the university level, then you've got all those educators teaching new educators coming in. So
That's right.
teacher training programs are going to be fed this information. And now look what we've got. It's blossomed out into a really nice candida infection.
Yeah. And remember, Frieri gets kicked out of Brazil, goes to Bolivia,
Right.
gets kicked out of Bolivia a week later, gets kicked out of, then I think he goes
Chile.
to Colombia or Chile.
Ends up
After
in
that,
Chile.
ends up in Chile. But who's there to take him? Harvard, of course,
Harvard brought him in after that.
right?
So I want to get to the Gnostic and Manichaean part,
Yeah.
because Steve, you've got some insight and background in this subject. But before we do that, I just want to drop into Paolo Freiri's mind for a minute.
Mhm.
So this is a guy who thought through all of these things,
Yeah.
right? He thought through all of these things and created a system, right?
Get into the real truth.
What do you think was driving him? This is the thing that I'm curious about, because not only does he come out with a comprehensive system, but it's so comprehensive that all these other people want to adopt it and bring it into these various foundations. What do you think is driving somebody like
For
Frieri?
one thing, he speaks words that sound like wisdom. You can start from there, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, my take on it, and this gets back into, this actually hooks into the Gnostic take, or what becomes Gnosticism by the time of Hegel. And that is, so what Gnosticism, he suffers, use that word, from a form of gnosis, of Gnosticism. We'll go back to projection, as does Marx. All right. And that form of Gnosticism is kind of like, I have the answer, right? What it is, it's right. I've talked about this a lot in my writings. It's the idea that you can get to the real through thought, that you can get to the gnosis through thought, instead of through revelation,
Mhm.
right? Through some sort of spiritual download, however you want to talk about it, right? So the someone wants to go outside. Go ahead, Jen. So what happens in the time of Hegel and the time of the Enlightenment, which was a recapitulation of rationalism, right? Both Marx, because you see Marx, and we talked about it before, Marx and Freire, they have this system, and there's no arguing against it, all right, because they've sealed it, right? They think that is gnosis, is that real knowledge. It's sounding like wisdom, but it's knowledge without the download, without the reality of it. In other words, it's only thought. And they have made this room out of thought, and only they can go in and out of it. There's no critiquing of it. And so I think that is one of the greatest seductions. And in fact, even in the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about the possibility of being attached to knowledge, attached to thinking. So what they've done is they have replaced thought with revelation. And they think, because so you have it. So there's no revelation.
They've replaced revelation with thought. I think that's what you
exactly. Sorry. Right. So I think that's the seductive part of it, and it has the other seductive part, of course, is, here I am helping the poor peasants. Right.
Well, that's okay. So that's the juice, right? When you identify with the oppressed, that's the juice. And I think that is the stand-in for the revelation.
Right. And it's and of course it's a crypto elitism.
Right.
Always.
I mean,
There's
when you
always, I
really,
know better.
yeah, Yeah, when you really boil it down and wrap your head around Frieri, it's fucking heady. Like it's super, super heady. Now when they boil it down and bake it and create a model for people to use, it's not as heady. All you got to do is just die to yourself and identify with the oppressed. And then all of your actions from that point forward are in support of the oppressed. But then you are never, ever, ever out of the purview of any kind of scrutiny. Like you will be scrutinized just to see how much you identify with the oppressed, right? It's getting back to Chris's point of being shrewd and say, well, I identify with these people, I feel their pain. You'll be called on it every now and then just to see how much you identify.
And you're never finished. You always have to keep killing yourself and
That's
dying
right.
into this new, you're never, ever, ever done. Either are the institutions ever done. They have to keep, re-examining and killing themselves in this. He talks about Catholicism and Christianity being a nihilist, like death cult. Necrophilic is the word he uses, institutions, because of the Christ dying on the cross and believing in the resurrection and all of that. At the Mass, you have the transubstantiation of the host and drinking the blood of the Christ. So, but they're doing the exact same thing. They're taking that model, they've stolen it, as you said. It's a theft. They've stolen that model and then flipped it and made it into their own new religion. And James Lindsay has a really good point. Just on those grounds alone, it should be expunged from this education system because it is a religion. And you can't have a religion in the school system. So on that point alone, they should be expunged.
Right, but they'll never be able to prove that, right?
Right.
I mean, that would be.
He pretty well proved it.
No, I think he proves it, but
Yeah.
in order to get it, if you're talking about getting it before a school board or getting it before like a state assembly or something like that, half of those people have already been indoctrinated
Yes,
into the pedagogy of the oppressed, right?
But it would be your one legal stand that you could make. If you were to make a stand in a legal system, I think that has some merit.
Let me ask you a question. I've never actually thought about this until now. Do you think that Frieri came up with this solely on his own?
Well, he was reading Hegel. Right?
He could have.
Or do you think that he was working with other people?
Well, I mean, yeah.
That
Again,
we don't know about to formulate these ideas.
Right. Well, he was already apparently working in Brazil with Camara.
Well, let's say a thing in itself does not exist. Everything exists in a context. Everything.
Right.
And so he didn't just blossom out as a new species. There were formative forces at play, swirling around these vortices that he was either caught up in, and it caught his attention, or whatever his personal experiences were and his personal relationships were. That's all affecting his voice, whether it's original thought, it seems, some of it, but it's theft, so it's not really original.
And South America was obviously much more in those days, and still probably, the people were much more political than in the United States. And it's like every 5 years your government would flip between Marxist and some general, some right-wing general coming in and authority. You just flipping between one authoritarian government
right.
and the other. So these people knew what was going on, or at least the rhetoric.
At least
it's in the middle of everything.
He was given the bully trumpet somehow, pulpit, excuse me. That his voice was the one that was the carrier wave.
And he really does. And he just takes Marxism and just moves it into theology,
Right.
into the church. So I mean, in the end, really, is there much original thought going on here? It's just very complicated and convoluted, but is it original? not really. He's just applying Marxism, to aspects of the church.
And if you look at-
But it's not just the church, it's also education, and it's also the public sector.
Right.
So what he has done is he's taken these ideas from Marx and probably Gramsci too,
Mhm.
because Gramsci is one of the fathers of cultural Marxism. Like he's the
Yeah.
guy that creates this idea that in order to change the system, you have to infiltrate every single crevice of the system,
Right.
and
That's what he's
not just get people who are theoretically part of the underclass to say
Right.
we're over this, right?
That's
So
what-
you've got Marx, you've got Gramsci. I don't know what kind of influence Marcuse has at that time, but what he seems to do is create a comprehensive strategic model to use all of those ideas in a way where they are not necessarily oppositional ideas that are introduced, but they are ideas that are integrated into the actual structures themselves.
Yes,
And I
exactly.
think that's where Frieri kind of stands apart from these other people, because he's
Right.
figured,
Candida.
Right.
yeah,
Right.
he's
It's
figured out a
because-
way to bake it into everything
Right.
without
So that's
people
the
even
praxis.
knowing they were getting it.
Right. So that's the praxis. He really brings in that focus on the praxis instead of maybe, Marcuse and all these people, and they're a little, who are in their academic, they get their tenure and they're all set. They don't have to worry about a friggin' thing,
But it,
and so, what was I gonna say? But he really brings the praxis in where people like Marcuse just, love to sit around and be adored by his surrounding students.
But isn't
Right.
it interesting how these things sometimes hang by a thread? So he was almost sidelined in the dustbin of history. He was, pushed from pillar to post from one country, Bolivia to Chile and then, all of a sudden, Harvard picks him up. He was nothing.
Right.
His ideas were rejected, rightfully so. And then Harvard picks him up.
Right.
So you kind of see that pattern happen in a lot of these instances where, either someone is fighting against this system. There have been so many people who've spoken out against injustice, and they're murdered, they're assassinated. They could have made a difference, but they're taken out of the equation. And kind of like a reverse of this, where he's put back in the equation. He was taken out of the equation, and then Harvard puts him back in. So oftentimes these things, it seems to me, have nodal points or turning points where they're brought back into play. We almost dodged that bullet, but we didn't dodge the bullet because someone else wanted it to go and have its trajectory.
That's
Yeah.
an,
And it's
that's
hit
an
its
interesting
mark.
point. That's a
You
very
know,
interesting point.
Here's another interesting nodal point. Valentinus, who is, or Valentinus, but from whence we get Saint Valentine, almost was the first bishop of Rome.
Mhm.
And he was a Gnostic. So you imagine the whole trajectory of the church if it began with a Gnostic pope
Mm.
or a Gnostic bishop, as opposed, to the whole, Rome.
Yeah,
the
Marx would have been a hardcore Catholic or something. I'm not Catholic, but a hardcore Essene or some shit like that,
Well,
right?
And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the whole Christic movement, that impulse of the Christ, as Rudolf Steiner would word it, that impulse came in with Christ, Jesus the Christ. But then there's that nodal point where the Roman Empire takes it over. And it does a 360. Then
Right.
ever since the Roman Empire got involved, then it became where, so we can now, we can impale Native Americans and we can disembowel them because they're not even human, they're savages. So this Roman Empire kind of mentality that takes over the good. And this is what we're dealing with to this day. This is still the Roman Empire spinning out of control. This
So-
is not, the Catholic Church is far from what it was
Oh,
initially.
yeah,
You can't even recognize it.
right. Absolutely. So a couple things, and I think we can transition into the Biden thing, because you brought up a good point about the chaos, the nodal points, the inversion, and taking something,
Stealing.
right? Taking something, stealing something, and then inverting it and converting it. So just put that over here for now, because I think that's what happened last night in a lot of ways. But there are two things. Number one, I want to just round off, Steve, what you said about the Gnostic piece, and that in your mind, the difference between what James Lindsay is talking. By the way, James Lindsay is an atheist.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
really
which is
surprised
surprising.
me.
Yeah, but
He,
okay.
he is not a Gnostic. He's not a Christian. So, but he knows enough about both to be able to speak fairly comprehensively. But in your view, Steve, the difference between what Lindsay is talking about, how the Gnosticism that's being used by Marx and then Frieri is Gnosticism without revelation.
Without I call it mysticism without mystical experience.
Okay.
So it's like I've got the answer, but the answer is only this aggregation of thoughts and this thought system that you have. Right.
Okay.
And the only reason you can't assail it is because you say I can't assail it. And I'm not going to respond to the questions, but the Gnostic, if you read the Gnostic texts, it's about getting you to a certain revelation, right? And the revelation of the nous, or as they called it, or of the divine, of the theos, as they would put it in Greek. So yeah, so again, Marxism and Freierism are antithetical to the individual gnosis, right? You can only have a collective gnosis. Until then, you're just heading towards it. And for them, even God is incomplete. You heard him say, God is incomplete. God gets, they're saying that Gnosticism is that God gets complete through us. Well, it's not friggin' the divine if it's incomplete, by definition.
So we were talking about that at breakfast, and we came up with the idea, or the image, that we are appendages of God rather than, we're not separate from God. We're appendages of God, and God experiences through our senses. So it's not like God needs us, is dependent on us, that he's incomplete. No, we are still like extensions of that divine will. We're appendages of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
It's the old,
like, be you
sorry.
merely the occasion in the Bhagavad Gita, or in Christianity, you would say, I'm an instrument of God's will. God, make me an instrument of your will, not my will, but thine. So there's different ways, different expressions of it in different traditions, but there's a recognition of it in any authentic tradition that has come out of revelation, and not from the age of enlightenment, the age of reason, where you think you can get there through your mind.
Yeah, it's the ancient immanence and transcendence, right?
So the one thing about Christianity in its most pure form that has always attracted me and spoken to me is that at the end of the day, you don't need to be an intellectual.
No.
Right? You don't need to be an intellectual. It cuts through all the heavy intellectual baggage, and that if you have a right relationship, again, wherever you fall in on the spectrum, everybody's got a different belief or different take on this. But if you believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, and you live your life through that to God, you don't need anything else.
No, you don't. No mediators.
No mediators. In fact, you don't even need scripture, to be honest with you.
No, you don't.
You need none of that. It is an anti-intellectual component to being able to be on this planet.
And I remember talking to in Turkey with someone, and we were talking about Islam, and he was kind of on the same page. He said, look, and Turkey would have like one of the mellowest forms of Islam, that, it's between me and God. That's what he says. That's what I love about Islam. It's the relationship between me and God, and nothing else, which is, as you say, the Christianity thing. You take up your cross, it's your relationship between yourself and the Christic impulse, and whatever revelation comes about
And
through
look,
that.
what did Christ say to the masses? Unless you become like a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Innocence. And that's
Yeah.
what they want to
So
kill.
that's where you began talking about innocence.
Right. Okay. Why don't we transition to what happened last night?
Good, because I'm sick of Freire.
Have we had enough Frieri or full
know.
Frieri?
There's a little lag in your video.
I
there.
know. My power's running down.
Oh, is that what it is?
It
Okay.
stops at about 9%. So
That's
we'll
right.
we'll just hang out with it
Good
for a
thing you're not in
second.
California. You can't plug it into a gas pump now.
It's one of these things with this computer, and I know that I need like maybe I could shut down some of these
Oh, you're back.
windows.
No, you're in
You're-
sync
you're-
now. You're in sync
You're
now.
okay again.
Okay. All right. Let's go to
Oh boy.
Well, thanks, Robert. That was
what
just good to talk about all that stuff.
yeah, no, I think it was a really good dive, and I think people need to understand. One of the other things I wanted to bring up before we moved on to Biden, and I think it could be a good bridge, is the Summer of Floyd.
Mm.
Right, the Summer of Floyd was a massive mind control program for people to die and to identify with the oppressed.
Ah.
That was a Freirean
Yeah.
psychological operation to get on a knee, right? That's
Right.
exactly what happened. And by the way, as a country, we have not been the same since.
But isn't it good? See, this is where pattern recognition comes in. Once we teach ourselves to recognize when we're being manipulated, then that breaks the spell.
Well, I think it breaks the spell for people like you and me and all the other people that are watching this.
Yeah.
But
Well, that ripples out.
not everybody. I think we're getting better at it. I think more people are getting wise to it. And maybe this will accelerate their wisdom here. Here we go. I've never seen anything like this.
This was, and already the memes are flying all over the internet with this image.
Yeah. So right off the bat, he comes walking in. He's basically being led by the hand by Jill,
Right.
his handler.
Literally.
And then, they give the little peck in the cheek, and then I think he sniffed her hair on the way over.
I think that was the last line of Coke that
maybe.
they had put in there.
Oh, what a
Maybe
good
that's
place
it.
to
Yeah.
hide it.
That's
Oh,
Yeah,
there
it's like Joe. It'll be just above her left ear.
That lends a whole new meaning to powdered wigs, right?
Yeah. Love you, honey.
So
Oh, God.
right. So then yep, and obviously he's juiced. And which we saw, a couple of months ago, and maybe it takes and maybe it took whatever weeks he's been on quote unquote vacation to to reassemble something for him.
Or
But-
have him be reassembled, right?
But obviously the Lenny Renestall, No,
Something like that.
Reifenstahl. Lenny
Reifenstahl.
Reifenstahl.
right?
Reifen.
Reifenstahl, perfect setting. All right. And then the Gemini Marines
Yeah.
on either side of him,
Yep.
the Marine band. So he's saying, I've got control of the military, and that's I've got the force of the military behind this. And it's on, and then of course the color, the darkness, it's a black mass. It's a black mass, and this is in my head fucking Satan saying, I'm running the show now. That's why I said it was, that's why I wrote you earlier that it was a Rubicon moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a good place to start. I would agree with all those things. This is also the taking back of the red.
Yes, right. So,
The Democrats and the left used to be red, and now they're taking back the red, and they're actually, if you listen to what he had to say, is that they are the true Americans.
Oh, yeah.
They're the ones that honor the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And it was in Philadelphia because they wanted to have that symbolic
Oh,
place.
you know
right?
what struck me too? Before he came out, they rang the bell.
Mhm.
right.
It didn't sound like the bell of freedom. It sounded like a death knell to me. If you go back and just listen to it, the tone, I don't think it's the original bell because that's cracked, right?
Right. Yeah.
But the symbolic bell, and it just really had an ominous sound to Krys. I don't know if anybody else
It
did that.
wasn't the Taco Bell. We know that.
No, it wasn't.
Yep. So they're making this huge pivot, right? And they've been working on this pivot for a while now. They've been on this pivot for at least 5 or 6 months. I remember when they first started to move towards this pivot
Mhm.
and repositioning themselves as basically center, right? They're trying to move this thing back into the center. And then they're demonizing even just the far right of the center, not the near right of the center. My bad. The
No.
near right of the center,
Yes, they are.
right? They're repositioning everything. They're reframing everything, recontextualizing everything. They're the real Americans. They're the true Americans. Trump, MAGA, the Republicans, these people are the threat. They're the fringe. Right? They are the force that is tearing this country apart. So join us in the center, right? Join us in the center. We're going to bring the country back together again. This is the message here.
Right.
And at the same time, he says, if you don't do it, we're going to take care of you. That's
Yes.
what's
Yes.
being said.
Yes, and that's go ahead. You say something.
Just that he threatened 3/4 of the American people.
Right. So yeah, one point I want to make is that he's continuously in the speech, and they've been going on and on and on about something that they keep on calling MAGA ideology.
Right.
Right. There's no, and without ever once, I mean, at least with Frieri, he's got an ideology and he's written 30 books on it. He spent some time working it out. These guys never once explain what MAGA ideology is or what any of the ideology that they're supposedly against is. The only ideology they have is that they question the election results, right? And but there's no such.
And then they have January 6th and they have
Right.
Charlottesville. Those are their
Right.
2 moments that they always pull from.
Right. And so, but it's interesting that they keep on calling it ideology without ever once having to say what that ideology.
Come on, man.
Right. So I just wanted to make that point before, I forget what else, maybe it's something else I was gonna say, but go ahead. Keep going.
Well, I think this thing is a pretty sophisticated psychological operation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because it's doing a number of different things. Number one, if you're an American who basically believes that the last election was stolen, right? If you believe that, and there's clearly a lot of prima facie evidence that this guy couldn't even draw 500 people. Okay, I'm sorry. That's on tape. We saw when he was out on his little tour, and the attendance to his events was pathetic.
Four Jeeps,
With the circles around the
four
chairs.
Jeeps in a circle.
Right. And then watching the Trump rallies where, it was like the Beatles, and you had upwards of 50,000 people at a time. So just the optics alone tell a very different story
Right.
to the outcome. Okay.
Yeah,
So I'm going to
I recommend 22,000 Mules. It's pretty good.
leave that there. Well, I'll leave that, but you have a bunch of people who are not happy about that.
Mhm.
You have a bunch of people who are not happy over the fact that they have to pay way more in gas. You got a bunch of people who are not happy over the fact that every time they turn around, they're watching drag queen fill in the blank, right? You have there's a large number of people who are pissed off. So what's he doing? He's poking the bear. They want to poke the bear,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then at the same time, they're coming in with the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, what makes this country great. We're all created equally under the same God. He says that in that speech.
Yeah, he does.
Well, if you're a critical race theory person, you're going to have an issue with that, by the way, because in a critical race theory position, you don't believe that, right? That belongs to a whole other form of oppression. So I don't want to get into that. So, but what he's doing, right, is they're creating this massive field of cognitive dissonance. Because on the one hand, theoretically, in this moment, everything that I just talked about, all those conditions, right, the election, everything that we've gone through, those things would equate to the oppressed, right? In this instance, the oppressed are normal Americans.
Yes.
Right.
Right. That's who the oppressed is.
I agree.
Right. And I think you're right. I think they're looking for a casus belli. They are, look at what happened to, I don't know, you probably know what happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene.
With the swatting.
So she
The
got
swatting.
swatted
Twice.
two days in a row, maybe a third time. I'm not sure about the third time. But one of the things she was the first time she was going to go to the door with her gun. And something told her, put the gun down. Right. And so she's convinced that they wanted her, do a death by cop thing. So anyway, so
The interview was excellent.
that is what's behind this, because it's on any prima facie evidence, there's nothing to January 6th. There's nothing anywhere.
Right.
They've made it up. They've lied continuously. They've made everything up. And, and now Trump is poking them back by saying, well, I'm going to pardon all these people when I get in. So anyway.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. But I feel like when he starts to reference the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and this country's greatness and why it's so great in the world, and we have a great century ahead of us and unlimited opportunities, right? He's creating this cognitive dissonance because those are all messages that Americans theoretically would relate to.
Right. And
He's looking for credibility.
And especially on the right.
Especially on the right. And then he's saying, well, these people over here, they're problematic. They're the biggest threat to what we're, true democracy. So what are they attempting to do with this black magic? This is black magic.
This is black magic.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly.
Are they trying to move people away from like the middle right, to come more to the center where Grandpa Joe will be the great mediator and bring peace between the left? Because what they've done is they've created such an intense polarity, right? Such an intense polarity. And he's like coming out here with the olive branch. I have the olive branch. Just abandon your ideology. Just abandon these crazy ideas that you have been seduced by. And if you do, you can join us in this new version of America where everybody is created equal under the eyes of God. This is what they're doing here.
Again, this
Right.
is the iron law of will projection.
Yep. Yes. Yes.
That's what that is, that reading of the Constitution and, look how good we are, but you're so bad. You've been destroying and shredding the Constitution. Well, that's the iron law of will projection. They are projecting
Absolutely.
literally onto the American, 3/4 of the American people, what they're doing from day one.
All right. Shall we sample some of the demonology here?
I just want to also just throw in, the thing is, it's not going to work. I mean, obviously it's not going to work on us. It's not going to work on the MAGA crowd. So, I mean, a fact of, oh, gee, that sounds reasonable.
No, but they're also doing this to stir the MAGA crowd too.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
They're doing it to get people's blood boiling. Right.
Well, yes. Yes.
Because they would love to have a conflagration.
Yeah.
They would love it.
And if they don't get one, they'll make one.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they're masters at that.
All right. Let's sample some of the black magic here. Let's see what the pretender in chief has to say.
That in America, we're all created equal. This is where the United States Constitution was written and debated. This is where we set in motion the most extraordinary experiment of self-government the world has ever known. With 3 simple words: we the people, we the people. These 2 documents and the ideas they embody, equality and democracy, are the rock upon which this nation is built. They're how we became the greatest nation on earth. They're why, for more than 2 centuries, America has been a beacon to the world. But as I stand here tonight, equality and democracy are under assault. We do ourselves no favor to pretend otherwise. So tonight, I've come to this place where it all began to speak as plainly as I can to the nation about the threats we face, about the power we have in our own hands to meet these threats, and about the incredible future that lies in front of us if only we choose it. We must never forget, we the people are the true heirs of the American experiment that began more than 2 centuries ago. We the people have burning inside of each of us the flame of liberty that was lit here at Independence Hall.
So this is something that Stephen Miller would have written for Trump.
Yeah, I was just thinking, they must have gotten a new speechwriter because they usually have the shittiest of speechwriters.
I'm also looking at the 2 split microphones and thinking of him speaking with a forked tongue.
That's interesting. So he's really selling this idea of America, right? And transposing it with the anti-America and the great threat to America, which gets back to this iron law of will that you're talking about. Let's hear him talk about that.
A flame that lit our way through abolition, the Civil War, suffrage, the Great Depression, world wars, civil rights. That sacred flame still burns. Now in our time, as we build an America that is more prosperous, free, and just. That is the work of my presidency, a mission I believe in with my whole soul. But first, we must be honest with each other and with ourselves. Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal.
Gee, I wonder why.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans
So hard.
represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans. But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country. These are hard things. But I'm an American president, not a president of red America, blue America, but of all America. And I believe it's my duty to level with you, to tell the truth, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful.
So he's going to be the great uniter.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing which we mentioned before is that I think this is also a justification for an upcoming arrest of Trump.
They're getting very close. I don't think they have the evidence.
No, but they're making, they put
That's
up,
never stopped
they
them
put up a
before.
picture of oh, look, top secret. Oh, look, Time
Right.
magazine,
Right. And all
Yeah,
that
Robert
was
Barnes was saying, since when are you allowed to take photographs of top secret or classified
right.
documents?
right. Well,
know?
I mean, basically, when Obama was president, I think he passed I don't think it was an executive order, but he did something
Yeah.
that basically said, look, if you look at it as a president, it's declassified.
Well, he can declare it. He can declare.
He doesn't have to declare it. Apparently,
But he has the ability to declare anything
that's right.
unclassified.
That's right. So but there's no formal procedure for that. You don't have to sit down and
Right.
fill out a form or
No, you
take a
don't.
stamp on it. Right. All you have to do as a president is wave your hand over it.
Yeah.
That's really what it amounts to.
And apparently Obama walked off with like 1 million pages of classified papers.
He walked out with a ton of shit.
A boatload,
Right. Of course,
Yeah.
for the library.
regardless.
The library. Right. So I do think I think this is an all-in moment. This is where we're headed.
Yeah.
And I think you guys were on my Sunday night show, and I looked at the Jupiter return of the start of World War II,
Yes.
and it was September 1st.
Oh,
Right.
September 1st. That was count the days.
Of course, yeah. I was in the back of my head. I said, I know there's something about September 1st. And
It was the Jupiter return, right? That cycle, that Jupiter cycle.
because that was the invasion of Poland.
That's right. And
Oh,
there were, it wasn't just this event, but there were 2 other events that happened in the last 48 hours. The Pope, I don't know if you caught this, but the
Oh,
Pope
yeah.
declared we're in
Oh,
World
yeah.
War III.
oh no, I didn't hear that. I heard
Oh, yeah.
about transferring the money back into the Vatican Bank or whatever. That some.
And then the other event was that the Poles now want reparations from the Germans for World War II,
Well, that's been going on for a while, hasn't it?
but they just made it very public
Okay.
yesterday. So here, look, I'll show you. Pope declares World War III
I missed that, I guess.
right here. Daily Mail happens right at the Jupiter return. Right here.
Of course, well, they would use, so it's I just did the math and it didn't really, 83 years.
Pope declares mankind experiencing the outbreak of World War III. There it is. What's the date on that? September 1st.
Wow.
That's the Jupiter return. And then we have Biden declaring war on Americans, basically.
Sounds like an
Right.
incantation.
A bunch of stuff, and we have, of course, the Pope is consolidating all the funds into one of it's not even a bank, it's
It's
like
some
a
kind of-
fund. It's a fund, so all the monies that are in the Vatican holdings are all going into one place right now by the end of this month.
Probably to protect them, right?
Yes, because
because
Anna,
the-
Anna
if
von
it-
Reitz had an article about it, and she was saying that it had to do with their creditors calling in their debts.
Interesting. And then what happens if there's a collapse in the banking system?
Mhm.
and they've moved all of their assets into some other.
Into
Some
a fund.
protected
It's a
place.
fund, yeah.
Right, right. So that's another kind of fail-safe move on the Catholic Church's part. So what do you think is going to happen? What's your best guess?
With, in what realm? I actually, I do think that they're going to arrest Trump. I think that October is going to be, everything points and everyone's talking is just not my, mystic prognostication, but I just feel like October is going to be a really bad month, and a lot of these things are going to happen, probably including the arrest of Trump, maybe the calling off of the elections, or, whether or not, I guess it depends on whether or not they can steal them or not. Because all of their continuance depends on holding the House. And, if there were real elections, I think they would lose the House.
And they know it.
They have
Right.
to, and they have to know that. So,
Right. So there was
yeah.
like a, not an emergency election, but there was an election recently in Alaska, and Sarah Palin lost to this other woman, I forget her name, Mary something. But apparently there was some type of voting called push voting that was employed during that election. I don't know what it is. Maybe people want to
it's
look
Well,
it up.
Robert Barnes was talking about it on the Duran with
Right,
Alex and Alexander. And
right.
he really explained it very well. It's not called push election. There's
It's-
another term for it,
it's
but
weighted.
downline voting or something like that.
In other
where-
words, you get, if you first, go ahead.
Yeah, you have your first choice and your second choice and your third choice and your fourth choice for your candidate.
Right.
They instituted that, but he said that most of the Republicans are not on board with that. And they just didn't fill in their subsequent desires for who should fill the position. They only filled out the top one and walked away. He said, had they understood the mechanism and how it's supposed to work, they would have filled in the whole, voting option.
I see.
Downline voting, something like that.
I think it's called downline. I think that's
Something
what it
like
is.
that.
Yeah.
But he said that made the difference. Had they not instituted that particular form of voting, which isn't all that bad, but if people are not accustomed to it and you're just thrust in, oh, what's this? Well, this is my candidate who I want, and they walk away. He said that's what happened. But he
Right.
still seems to feel that Sarah Palin is going to somehow, I don't know if it's like down the road, come in and win an election. But it was on the Duran yesterday or 2 days ago. And that crew is so interesting to listen to.
Everybody likes that show.
I really appreciate them. They
Yeah.
are so good. So that's what that was.
Well, Sarah Palin beat Nick Begich III to get that seat. And of course, Nick Begich is the son of was the senator from Alaska that died in that plane crash with Hale Boggs. That's a weird story in and of itself. That whole Hale Boggs, Nick Begich thing is just so weird.
Was Nick Begich the one who wrote the book, Angels Don't Play This Harp?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
But his father
Mhm.
was
I think you're right.
the senator from Alaska, and he died in this plane crash with Hale Boggs.
Like Paul Wilson.
And they never found the plane.
Hmm.
And it turns out that Begich's wife was banging this mafia guy from Arizona who was setting up the cocaine trade for the pipeline workers.
Ouch.
So
Oh.
this guy who was having an affair with Nick Begich's mother sets up the death of Nick Begich's father,
Really?
Wow.
and then marries Nick Begich's mother.
Oh,
Ooh.
gee, that's right out of Hamlet.
How dark is that shit?
Wow,
That's right out of
really
Hamlet.
Ugly.
Really ugly. I talked about this with Russ Winter. There's a great podcast available. If anybody wants to really go down that rabbit hole, it's a great podcast, and it's a series of, it's almost like a whodunit, with, let me see if I can find it, with basically digging into how they find the guy who, for all intents and purposes, plants a bomb that obliterates this plane. Let me see if I can find this podcast real fast. I highly recommend. It's very entertaining.
And whose podcast is?
I'm gonna,
Russ's?
no, it's not Russ. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. It's a really, really good podcast. It's by a journalist who did like a real journalistic work. It's called Missing in Alaska. And it's on Audible. And I think it's on also maybe Spotify or iTunes. I'm going to put the link up here. I'll show you guys with the screen share. It's right there. Missing in Alaska. iHeart Podcasts. So you can listen to it for free. And I highly recommend it. We listened in the car. We were driving, I think, from
Wow.
South Carolina through Florida. Took us a few hours to go through it. And it was just really compelling. And it gets into things like letters from people in prison that were in the same prison as the guy who set up the bomb. And it's very interesting.
World. People
So-
live this way. You get a human life and this is what you do with it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know where to go with that. I mean, obviously, the wife of the father was not happy, right? She for whatever reason, she wasn't getting her bell rung. And here comes this guy who's dangerous. He's part of the mafia from Phoenix. He's there in Alaska to set up the cocaine trade on the pipeline.
That's how Chris felt for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
Love at
see
first
that.
sight.
And she meets this guy, and what is he? He's probably a wild man.
Yeah,
Right? He's
yeah.
a wild man. He's dangerous. They probably get high. They screw all weekend, right? And the next thing you know, she's switching teams. Yeah, was she a party to the disappearance of the guy's father? I don't know. They don't get into that part of it in the podcast, but they get into even like the details of the plane and how they were able to kind of find that there were two different planes. So if you're really into investigative journalism that almost unfolds like a mystery, I highly recommend that.
Yeah. We're always
Okay.
looking for something interesting to learn.
Yeah. All right. What about you guys? Yeah, I think we're gonna
Okay.
pull the yacht into the dock. So this is the time for
Okay.
you to talk about what's going on with your world and your
Yeah.
works.
So talk about Freeman.
Oh, yeah. We just had a nice 3-hour interview with Freeman Fly a couple of days ago. And
Wow,
it
3
was-
hours. That's a long interview.
Well,
Good-
it's two
good chat.
parts. He's
right.
got his, I guess, I don't know if it's Patreon or whatever the private subscription part is.
Right.
That part.
And I
So
Don't know when it's going up. I don't know. He puts it up on usually the weekend afterwards. I'm not sure.
do you know
Right.
his schedule?
I don't know.
I don't, but I'm
Anyway,
sure.
maybe if Steve's in the chat.
I think
room,
Steve
he
is
can
in
put it up.
chat. He's probably in chat. He might be able to tell
And
people.
thank you, Steve, for setting us up with Freeman again. This is our second talk with Freeman. It was about 3 or 4
But-
years ago.
But we actually had a lot of fun with
We
it.
did.
We did.
We did.
We covered a lot of ground. So anyway, so that
And we're kind of neighbors. We're like, what, an hour?
Yeah.
You're not that far away. Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
really.
and
So
and
we
then
might get
on
together. That'd be
Monday
fun.
we're recording with Danny Katz, and so that will be available to people who subscribe to her on YouTube, I guess. And I guess I don't know, or I don't know if she has a Patreon thing too. So however she works it.
When is your book coming out, Steve?
So still working on it. And I'm just trying to get it out by the end of the year. we've got Elisa E's book in production. I've got it to our book designer. So that's the book on her life in MK Ultra,
Astonishing, just
which is
jaw
really
dropping.
amazing book.
It's like reading Kathy O'Brien's life. It's
Wow.
maybe one louder, maybe it's an 11.
Yeah, because because
Oh, yeah.
it gets into the altars much more, and it really, she tries to write it. She writes it in the first person plural, in that, so that you can kind of feel what it's like to have these altars, and her altars were, she's got kill altars and all this sort of stuff going on.
Wow.
But it comes, and also because it's written as it comes to her, fragmentary, so you've got that experience too. So
And she has artwork that she's done. So
Yeah.
her collages that she created through her healing process are all peppered throughout the
yeah,
book.
so it's going to be a color book.
So
and
you've got imagery supporting the text.
Sounds interesting.
It's very interesting.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
She's
I got,
amazing.
yeah, so our designers on that, I don't know, that might take a month or two to come out. And
Mindy Meltz, her
and
book
then,
is out.
we have the Mindy Meltz book of the third part of the After Ever After trilogy. We have Jean Hartigan Wayner's book. We have
Well, say
Peter
what that
Lambo-
is. Well, Jean Hartigan Wayner's book is Walking with Alethea. And
How's that going? How's that being received?
it's okay. It had a big start, and it's slowed down significantly, but it's still selling.
But Jean
she-
was abused by the priests in her school as a teenager back in the 70s.
Right.
And her teacher was murdered, who was trying to, blow the whistle on these priests. So that's still an open case in Baltimore.
Yeah,
And the Netflix series called The Keepers interviews Jean. They started out, they were going to just do one segment, but there was so much intrigue. They ended up doing 7 episodes, and Jean comes in on episode 2, and she's in it for the whole rest of it. And it's fascinating. So that's Walking with Alethea.
And that's still on Netflix, the
it
series.
is.
Yeah, yeah,
It is. It's
yeah.
still, one
We
of the
watched
big
it and
shows.
we were captivated.
Yeah, it's another great investigative, show.
They do a
Do,
lot
do,
of
do you guys
interviews.
have links to that on your website?
Not to the Netflix, no.
I mean,
It's good.
well, it'd be hard because Netflix is like paywall, right? But
Right.
they probably have a trailer for it that you could link to.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yes, that's a good
Okay.
idea. Yeah, I mention it. Since it's about her healing from it, so she's just not.
I
just-
understand
herself.
it's sort of like you don't want to be exploitative because the material is more about her recovery from it.
You have to tell the
I get it.
story. So the
You-
story
you
is
have
there.
to, right?
Plus, I'd rather have them buy the book.
Well, but I think if
Yeah,
from a
I know.
search engine perspective, right? Because we're talking about search engines.
Mm,
If you could do, again, I have to go to your website, and I'm not here to help you with your marketing, but from a search engine perspective, if you can post that somewhere on your site
that makes
with
sense.
written text links to the whole
Yeah,
Netflix
no, that's
series,
not a bad idea.
Thank you.
so
for
that
Yeah,
when,
I
when
have a
they
page.
when people type it in, boom, it pops. It's like, oh, what's this?
Good,
There's a
good.
book
Yeah.
about this woman. Yeah.
And we should talk
We
about,
have a separate page in each. We have a separate page for each book within the website. So
Right.
that'd be a good place to put it.
and
Yeah,
then
and-
I'd like
yeah.
to also bring up Miriam Hanane's book coming up on George Floyd. That's
So you
another one.
guys, so did she get enough money to get the
She's working on
funding
it.
for everything?
Well, she's working on it. I think she's working on the film.
Right.
And also there's somebody writing a screenplay for the Elisa ebook also,
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
to do like a fictional
Yeah.
version of her story.
So does Miriam Hanane have a title for her book yet?
She just changed it, so now I'm not going to remember.
All right.
There's something.
But Miriam has really back information on what took place that day in Cup Foods, and she's interviewed I don't know who the
His
man
best
is.
friend Maurice.
Maurice, his best friend Maurice. So she's got a video interview with him, and that's going to be in the documentary, I
Do
guess.
some people call him the space cowboy?
Could be.
I don't know. What is that?
The pompous of Minneapolis.
Oh, you gotta have to explain that. I have no
That's
idea what
a,
you're talking
that's a
about.
Steve Miller
It's
song.
Steve Miller joke.
Oh, okay.
Space
So
Cowboy.
anyway, we're kind of excited for Miriam, and she's been doing a lot of podcasts, trying to drum up interest, and get some money to support her project for the
Right.
documentary. And she's very articulate. She's also on, she's been interviewed. Does she have a special show? Is it on American Periscope Media, or is that some other?
I don't think so. I think she's just been on other people's shows.
Okay, maybe it was Jim Fetzer or something. Anyway, I know she has like a regular gig somewhere where she's
Well, it sounds like you guys have some great stuff coming up here.
it is. It's
So
been, yeah.
we're kind of absurdly busy, and then, getting out the books and editing them is really put a crimp in my writing. So I'm in a like kind of quiet space, and as soon as I've been able to get a little bit back to it, which is good. So I'm in the middle of the George Floyd chapter, which is the sacrifice, which is the hub about which the whole project of my book spins.
You could say a little bit about why you chose it to be in a mythological framework.
Why I chose
How you saw it
because that was the
way.
revelation, was that the whole thing maps onto an ancient Greek sacrifice. The whole COVID up until now just maps onto it. So you can just take every part of what's happened to us and see it as a part of the sacrifice, as inverted.
The hand washing is the ablutions and
Yeah,
all the
wash your
different
hands.
stages of it.
The invocation is event 201, and on and on. So each aspect, there would be processional. So what was the procession? Where everyone would sing and dance and do art and have a processional leading up to the sacrifice. Well, and then right after the sacrifice, the processional turns into the Summer of Floyd, where you have all these death marches and fire marches, and so the blood was after the sacrifice. The killing of George Floyd, of course, usually they slit the throat of the animal during a sacrifice. George Floyd's throat is not slit, but the whole thing is around "I can't breathe," right? And the blood comes after the sacrifice in this case. So it's really fleshing out all those kind of
It
ideas.
really is.
With some great ancient art pictures.
Yeah. Lots of pretty pictures for those of you who like pretty pictures.
You guys ever get into William Henry at all? Do you know William Henry?
Varieties of religious experience?
No, that's Henry James.
Oh, that's Henry James. Nope. Don't know who that
I
is.
think William lives in Nashville. He had a show on Gaia right
Yes,
around the
yeah.
same time I did.
Yes.
And he's done a lot. I don't know. His name just popped up into my head with how he and his wife would look at all these paintings and
Oh,
break them down
right.
esoterically. And
I remember now.
Yeah. I remember some of it was good, but yeah, we had trouble
With the personalities.
with their personalities, let's just say.
right.
You know,
I met
I mean, it
William.
was like-
He's actually a really nice guy.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. That's good.
Yeah. I don't know about his wife, but he's cool. I like
Oh,
him.
good.
All right.
Thank you, Robert.
We'll see you next month.
All the best with everything.
Thank you, everyone,
We'll
for
see you in a
listening.
month. Have a wonderful birthday this month.
Oh, yeah. That's
Wow.
going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
You get to a certain stage and you kind of like forget them.
Yeah, we'll get there. Well, once you're in the decade between significant number changes.
But it's nice getting your presents. Robert.
Yeah. It's nice is people saying happy birthday.
Yeah.
I like- I
People
like that.
appreciating you being born.
Yeah.
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 Thanks
Yeah.
for coming in, Robert.
And, well, it's a dirty job, but somebody had to do it.
Right.
You're doing it well.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll-
All right. You two
Okay.
take care, and
Bye,
we'll
everyone.
see you next month. Everybody else, use your head in order to discern what's real. Your heart to say what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Be back in this channel on Sunday night for Sunday Night Astro Live, and that's going to be at 6 p.m. Central, where we talk